Hey, this is Ralph Macho here. I'm Jarrett's dog. You may have seen me from pictures he posts on his website and whatnot. But yeah, thanks for stopping by the studio today, guys. We're here to talk about Lunch Lady and the School-Wide Scuffle. It's the 10th book in the Lunch Lady series. I sit here in my dog chair over here, and I eat my bones and watch Jarrett work real hard on these books. So stick around. We're gonna watch the Lunch Lady 10 trailer, and Jarrett will be live in the studio in just a sec.
This is the fifth bank to be robbed in just 2 weeks. In other news, authorities have yet to track down the fugitives who broke free from jail. More after this.
Liver and onions, Salisbury steak, sloppy Joe Tuesday, hot turkey plate, lunch lady.
Hello, my name is Jarrett and welcome to my studio. This is where I work and where I write my stories and where I draw the illustrations for my books. And I'm going to talk to you guys today about the latest Lunch Lady book. It's called Lunch Lady and the School-Wide Scuffle. It is the 10th book in the series. And I'm going to tell you, I talk a little bit about this book, but also I'm going to talk to you about how this book came to be. So what we're going to be doing this afternoon is the grown-ups that are there with you can type in questions via the social stream. And I'm going to answer those questions later on. But if you want to start and by entering some of your questions now, after I talk about how I came up with the idea for the Lunch Lady series, I'm going to be drawing some of the characters, and I'll answer some of your questions while I draw. So the Lunch Lady books have been around in my mind for some time. I first started thinking about the books way back in 2001. What happened was my first book was published, and when my first book was published, I went back to my old elementary school in Worcester, Massachusetts, to talk to the kids there about writing. And when I was there, and they set me up, the school set me up in the cafeteria, and I was setting up my presentation, and I looked across the room, and I ran into my old lunch lady, the lunch lady that I had known as a kid. And I hadn't seen her in so many years, and I was surprised to see her, so I went up to say hello, and I went up and I said, "Hi, Jeannie, how are you? And it's good to see you." She looked at me, and I could tell she recognized me, but she couldn't quite place me. She couldn't quite catch my name, and she looked at me and she said, "Stephen Krasoska?" And I was amazed that she knew I was a Krasoska, but Stephen's my uncle who's 20 years older than I am, and she had been his lunch lady when he was a kid. So she started telling me about her grandkids and how they were and how proud she was of her grandchildren, and it blew my mind. I thought, grandkids? I didn't know you had grandkids because I didn't know you had kids because I didn't know you left school. I thought you lived in the kitchen with the spatulas and the serving spoons. And that chance encounter inspired my imagination, and I started writing a story about the secret lives of lunch ladies. So what I did was I opened up my sketchbook, and I started drawing this lunch lady character. And I wrote a book that was not a graphic novel, it was a picture book about these kids who debated what they thought their lunch lady did with herself after school. One kid thought maybe she was an opera singer, another kid thought maybe she was a taxi driver, but one of the kids said, well, maybe she's a spy who knows karate. And that to me quickly became the more interesting story to tell, but that story would no longer fit into the format of a picture book. Because you see, a picture book is only 32 pages long, and this story now that's about heroes versus villains and mysteries that would need to be solved, it would need to be a much longer book. And I wasn't quite sure what kind of book format it would take, but I loved the concept. And so even though I was publishing other books like Baghead and Punk Farm, I'd always go back to my sketchbook and I would dream up ideas for this character. Who was she? What could she do? What couldn't she do? I debated about should she wear a costume when she fights crime? And what does she look like? How does she get around town? And eventually I invented other characters too, so I realized that she needed help. So for a while, for the first 2 or 3 years of drawing this character in my sketchbook, it was just that one lunch lady character. But then I thought, she needs a sidekick. James Bond has Q, Batman has Robin, Lunch Lady has Betty. And Betty helps Lunch Lady in the cafeteria and in the crime lab. So she's kind of like the backbone of the whole operation. And I also realized that I needed some young characters for my young audience that would be reading these books. And so that's how I came up with Hector, Terrence, and Dee. And after thinking about this book for some time too, I realized, okay, she needs spy gadgets that would be disguised as items from the cafeteria so her cover wouldn't be blown. So she got a spork phone, a spatchicopter, fish stick nunchucks. She got a milk spy camera, rubber glove, suction cups, a lunch tray laptop. And then I had a chance to be part of this book, Guys Write for Guys Read. And we were asked to reflect on our relationship with reading and creativity from when we were kids to now being adults working in publishing. And as one of the few artists invited on, I thought I should revisit some old artwork of mine. And I looked through all of this old artwork that I have saved in storage bins, and I realized that everything I had made growing up, through my teen years, through my college years, almost everything was a comic. So I took this comic that I made as a 5th grader, and I continued the story. And I remembered what I loved about making comics. And after rereading those childhood comics, I realized 2 things. I realized that Lunch Lady needed to be told as a comic, but I also found the tone of the series. It was by rereading those comics that I wrote as a 5th grader that set the tone for what the Lunch Lady books would become and how they would feel and how the characters would speak. And I shared this with my publisher, this pitch, this idea. They liked the book so much they said they wanted to publish the book. But of course, they realized pretty soon that pretty early on that they couldn't publish the books in full color because they didn't want to put out a very expensive book. They didn't want to put a book out for $15 or so. They wanted to put a book out that would be more affordable. So they came up with the idea of printing the books with just 2 inks, black ink, and the second ink that we chose was yellow, and that's inspired by the iconic dishwashing rubber glove. And that's why these books are printed in black and yellow. Now, I have the white of the paper. I can tone down that black ink to create a gray. I can tone down that yellow color to get a cream color. But now these books are going to happen, and I need to know how to draw the characters and have each character look like the same person every single time I draw them. So I have to practice. And I draw those characters again and again and again and again until it just becomes second nature to me, and every single time I draw the character, it looks like the same person. And then I set out to write the book. So see, I did all of this world building and brainstorming and learning about the characters, learning about the rules for this fictional world that I would create. And when I set out to write a book, I used a device I learned about as a kid called the Story Mountain, where I chart out the beginning, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and resolution of the story, which helps me as a visual thinker. And I should point out too that when I start off with a blank Story Mountain, I'm not always starting at the very beginning. Maybe the first idea I have is a moment for the climax of the story, and I would write that down first. And then I just make page after page of notes on what I want to happen in the story. I lay out the book, trying to figure out what moment will happen on which page. And I'll make 96 pages worth of sketches. 96 pages worth of sketches, and also I'll write out a script. My editor will read that, she'll think about it, and she'll write me an editorial letter. And in this editorial letter, she's going to say, hey, this is what I love about the story, and this is what I don't really love about the story. So she's pushing me to write a better book. So I'll edit and rewrite and revise, and I'll eventually get all of the artwork done for the book. And the artwork, which is created with pen and ink, is brought over to my scanner, and it's scanned in the computer. And it's on the computer that I plug in all of the shades of yellow, the shades of gray, the text, and it's those computer files that are used to print copies of the book. So I'm going to draw some pictures for you now, and I'm going to talk to you about how I draw my characters. And every character starts off with, here I am, this is, here on my drafting table is my light, and attached to my light is a camera. So every character is made up of a series of shapes. So I draw with a special shade of pencil called No Photo Blue. It's a special shade of pencil that won't get picked up by the scanner, so I don't have to go through and erase all of the pencil marks from the entire book. And every character is made up of a series of shapes. So for Lunch Lady, I start off by drawing an upside down teardrop, a regular ended teardrop, and I'm going to figure out where her limbs are going to go and what her pose will be, where her arms and legs are going to go. And it's here that I could reassess the proportions of things. So maybe I'm thinking, well, that head is a little bit too big for her body, so I'll make the head a little shorter. And from there, I layer information on top of that. So her hair, her glasses, facial features, her clothes. Maybe I might say, you know what, I want this other arm to go down this way instead. And from there, I'll take out my ink, and I use India ink. It's a special ink. It's very dark, and it'll give me nice, crisp black lines. And I actually draw the line work with a brush. So I'll dip my brush into the ink. And I like drawing with a brush because depending on how hard I press on the brush, my line can go from thin to thick, like that in one stroke. And that adds more dynamic line work to my art. Now, I do tend to use a pen if I'm going over some of the small detail work. Maybe if there's a big scene with a lot of characters and I have to draw the images very small, or if I have to draw the facial features to be very small. So, and as I mentioned, when I set my scanner to black and white, the computer will not recognize this blue pencil work. It'll only recognize the black ink. So that's why you don't see that work, that pencil work, in the finished books. But if you're ever to see an original from one of the books, you would see where not only did I make changes, like when I decided to change that arm, but you'll see all of the underwork. And if I make a mistake here with the ink, I can use whiteout. Sometimes I will edit the ink in Photoshop. And what that means is I can redraw things on the computer. But this is how I created all of the artwork for all 10 Lunch Lady books. And there you go. Well, what I'll do now is I'll read a few questions, and I'll draw another character for you guys, and while I'm drawing that character, I will take some questions. Wow, it looks like a ton of questions have come in. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And we'll start, go back here to... from the third graders from Mrs. Gagney's class. They want to ask, how did you know you wanted to be an author? Okay, I will take that question while I set up for another piece of artwork here. How did I know I wanted to be an author? Well, I always loved to use my imagination. I always loved to tell stories. I always loved to invent characters. It's just something I literally always wanted to do. And okay, the next question is... let's see here. Okay, and Nick from Sterling, Connecticut, he wants to know how long have I known that I... Oh, he wants to know how long have you been an author? Well, you know, I've been a published author since the summer of 2001. That's when my first book was published. But I considered myself an author before that, as should all of you, because an author is somebody who writes stories. It doesn't matter if the book gets published or not. It doesn't matter if you're a kid or if you're a grown-up. Okay, how does it feel to have fans? And that's from Mrs. Ganto's third grade class in Connecticut. It's pretty neat to have people who are really into my characters and my stories, because these ideas, they all come from my mind and they all come from my imagination. So because my work is published, I'm able to share those ideas and stories with people. And it is just a thrill to know that people have connected with those ideas. Mrs. Weller's 4th grade class in Stone Oak Elementary School, San Antonio, they want to know, will there be an 11th Lunch Lady book? Well, there may someday be a Lunch Lady number 11, but I don't have any immediate plans to make an 11th book just yet. I have a bunch of other books that I'm working on. I have other middle grade chapter books that I'm working on. I have other graphic novel ideas that I want to work on. And I've been working on the Lunch Lady books in one way or another for a very long time now. A little over a decade now. And I've been working really intensely on these books since around 2007 or 2008. And after 10 books, that's 960 pages of Lunch Lady comics, you can imagine that I'm excited to try other things. But I'm not completely closing the door to creating new Lunch Lady books someday. It just might take a while. In fact, I'm also working on an anthology of comics. And what that means, an anthology is a book where a bunch of authors create little short stories to make up this greater book. And the anthology is called Comic Squad, and I have an advanced copy of the book right here. And I got together with my friends Matt and Jenny Home, who create the Squish and Baby Mouse graphic novels. And we gathered a bunch of our pals, like Dave Pilkey, who created Captain Underpants, and Raina Telgemeier, who creates Smile. And we asked them to write little short stories. And every Comic Squad volume will have a short story by me. And in every Comic Squad book, there will be a little mini comic that stars somebody else from the Lunch Lady universe. So the very first Lunch Lady mini comic for the first Comic Squad book is about Betty. And it talks, so Lunch Lady has called in sick, and Betty is on her own for lunch, and hilarity ensues. Everything goes wrong. So I'm going to keep the characters around through the Comic Squad books, and someday in the future, that Lunch Lady may just don that yellow rubber glove again. Okay, another question I'll take. Mrs. Roberts' 3rd graders want to know, do I prefer writing picture books or chapter books? Well, I don't really have a preference. I just love stories, and I love telling stories with words and pictures. And to me, my chapter books are so heavily illustrated, I'm able to do both. Zach from Sterling, Connecticut, he wants to know, would like to know why you decided to write and illustrate. Well, I always love to use my imagination. I always love to draw. And that's really why I wanted to do what I'm doing now. So Jaden from Stone Oak wants to know, did I ever consider another career aside from being an author? Well, I have always loved to teach as well. I've always loved video work as well. So if I wasn't writing and illustrating, I would be a teacher somewhere, or I would be working on videos in some capacity, TV shows or movies. A 3rd grader, Ashley from Glastonbury, wants to know, do I write in a notebook or on a computer? Both. I tend to start brainstorming on good old-fashioned paper. But then when I'm really getting into the story, I outline everything on my computer in a Word document. Let's see, a bunch of questions coming in. What did I like to read when I was in 3rd grade? And that's from Mrs. Gagney's 3rd grade class. What did I like to read? I love to read comics, like from the newspaper. So I would read Calvin and Hobbes. I would read Peanuts. I would read Garfield. And in terms of books that I would find in my school library. I absolutely loved The Mouse and the Motorcycle by Beverly Cleary and James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. Those are my favorite things to read. I'll take another question here. Have I ever had a different job? And that's again from Mrs. Gagne's class. Well, I used to be a counselor at the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp in Ashford, Connecticut, which was such a great job. I loved working there and working with kids from all over the country who were dealing with various illnesses. And it's a remarkable, beautiful, beautiful camp and beautiful place and awesome mission. Melissa SLMS wants to know, how many times do you, this is from the Amigos library, how many times do you sketch a character before you put it in one of your books? Well, I draw the character a bunch of times, and I just keep drawing them until it looks like the same person every time I draw them, so without much effort. So I don't have to really try hard, and it pretty much looks like the character, and that's my judge of how long I'll need to draw the character. And even over the life of a series, the character will change a little bit. But really, the most important thing is that they look like the same person in that one book. Christine wants to know, what's the first character you came up with? Well, the very first character that I came up with in the Lunch Lady series was the Lunch Lady. And before I invented Betty, there was one kid who would sneak out of class to help Lunch Lady in the boiler room. But that became problematic, because how would I get that kid out of class without the teacher realizing that kid had been gone for a while? So that one kid was split into 3 kids, and that would be the 3 kids that I'm drawing now: Hector, Terrence, and Dee. The Breakfast Bunch, the kids who help Lunch Lady solve these mysteries. And then that's when Betty stepped in, because Lunch Lady needed some help. How long did it take you to write the Lunch Lady series? That's from grade 4 at Amigos School. Well, I have been working on the Lunch Lady series for so long. Each book in the series takes me about a year to put together. But I brainstormed the series and what it would all look like and who the characters would be over about 5 years or so. The most difficult book in a series to write is always the first one, because you are setting things up for the series. Whatever decisions you make in the first book, in terms of who the characters are and what the rules are of this fictional world, you have to stick with. So early on, I had to ask myself, does Lunch Lady have superpowers, or does she rely on her wits and her gadgets, like James Bond does, or like Batman does? And ultimately I said, you know what, I'm not going to give her superpowers. I'd like for her to be a real person who just can do extraordinary things. And there we have Hector, Dee, and Terrence. Okay, I'll take a few more questions, and then we're going to have a visit from an old friend of mine. Someone from Amigos School Library wants to know, did any of these superhero moments happen to me? Yes and no. I mean, the Lunch Lady series is totally fictional, even though some real-life people may have inspired the characters. The characters aren't much like the real people that they're based on. Someone from Amigos School, grade 4, wants to know, what do you do in your free time? Well, I don't have a ton of free time because I'm so busy making books, but I do like to snowboard, and I do like to bowl, and I like to spend time by the ocean, and I really enjoy time with my family. I have 2 daughters that are 5 and 2, and I'm married. I have a wife named Gina. Here, Roxy from Latimer Lane School in Simsbury wants to know, what do I think of myself first, as an author or a... Oh, did you first think of yourself as an author or a writer? You know, I considered myself someone who told stories with words and pictures, always. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this character. You might be familiar with him. He is kind of the bane of the Breakfast Bunch is existent. This is Milmo. And it's fairly commonly known that my actual lunch lady inspired the lunch lady character. But a number of other characters were either named after or modeled after friends of mine. And that includes this character, Milmo. Sort of the school bully, thinks he's pretty fantastic. And he does offer up a lot of comic relief in the story because he's a pretty ridiculous character. And I mentioned the Hole in the Wall gang just a moment ago. And one of my closest friends, not just from Hole in the Wall, but my closest friends in the whole world, his name is Chris Milmo. So there is an actual Milmo, and he was a counselor at the Hole in the Wall gay camp with me. So we're going to go live. We're going to go live to a gymnasium in New Hampshire to hear from Milmo himself. Hey Chris, how are you?
Hello, Lunch Lady fans. Jarrett Krzaska based the character Milmo the Bully on me, the real Milmo. It's been a great honor to be appearing in the Lunch Lady series, but I want you to know that I am no bully, and I don't respect bullies. Bullying is one of the meanest things you can do to a person. Don't ever bully. I've coached college lacrosse for the last 2 years, and we have a very strong no bullying stance. Do good in school, do your homework, and keep reading.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks for joining us. Did you have any other final words or thoughts you'd like to express to all of the kids who are out there reading Lunch Lady?
We all know the best part of the Lunch Lady series is me, Milmo. And I think it's time the Milmo character in the Lunch Lady series receives his own spin-off. Jarrett, give the fans what they want. Give them a Milmo-focused book. Thank you very much.
Well, that's certainly something to consider, Milmo. I don't know if there really is a big demand for a Milmo-only book. Honestly, I don't know how well that would even do out there. But perhaps someday, maybe I'll make a Milmo mini comic, like I made a Betty mini comic for a Comic Squad book. A few more questions I'll take before we go. Mrs. Shin's third grade class, they want to know if I ever have to do any editing or rewrites. Yes, every Lunch Lady book probably goes through 5 or 6 or 8 different rewrites and edits before I'm able to create all of the final artwork for the book. Tyler in Simsbury, Connecticut, does Lunch Lady get any new gadgets? Well, the last book, the 10th book, she has so many different gadgets that you know from previous books. There may be 1 or 2 that you've never seen, but really it's like a hall of fame of all of the previous gadgets. Someone wants to know, am I sad to end the Lunch Lady series? Well, you know, I'm very attached to the characters, but I know that they're not going anywhere. That I do have the chance to someday come back to this. In the meantime, I have a bunch of other books that I've been working on. You may have read Platypus Police Squad, The Frog Who Croaked. The sequel is called The Ostrich Conspiracy, and this book is coming out in May. I have a new picture book coming out, and that book is called Peanut Butter and Jellyfish. So yeah, I started my career as a picture book author illustrator. So I'm very excited to get back to the format, and in a very different way because the art here is very different from all of my previous picture books. So as an artist and as an author, I constantly want to challenge myself to grow and to try new things. And it's been inspiring to hear from the readers of the Lunch Lady books and also to see the adventures that they put the Lunch Lady on. So, you know, just because this is the last Lunch Lady book I'm making for now, doesn't mean that the kids that are watching this can't create their own adventures with the characters. I mean, I used to make my own Batman comics and my own Ninja Turtle comics, and I hope that kids come up with more adventures, and I do see it all the time. So hang tight. Perhaps someday we'll get back to the Lunch Lady series, but for now, I hope you enjoy the 10th book, and there are 10 books out there that you can enjoy and reread if you prefer, if you want, before another book may someday come. But I'm really proud of this series. I'm really proud of the 10th book, and I really hope you dig it. So thanks so much for spending time with me here in the studio, and I'm going to throw it back to my dog, Ralph.
Hey, thanks again for coming by, everybody. Happy reading. See ya. Bye now. Toodaloo. Okay, this is just getting awkward now. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. I get it. All right. Talking pug. It's weird. Whatever. It's my thing. Be cool. Bye.
Lunch lady, her name is Lunch Lady. She's gonna save me, Lunch Lady. Lunch Lady.